You are listening to the podcast of the Mathias Corvinus Collegium, the largest talent management institute in Hungary. If you want to know more about our mission, please look up our English website at mcc.hu/en or check out our Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter channels. For interesting articles and analysis of our professors, external contributors, and students, look up our knowledge base at corvinus.hu/en.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the next installment of the Fellow Talks podcast series. As we are closing into the end of the semester, we are also about to end the Budapest Fellowship program, but here we have many excellent stories to tell. And one person who will tell these stories is going to be Luke Larson. Thank you, Luke, for being here with us.
Thank you very much, Spencer. You're welcome.
Your trips around Europe have been very intriguing to me because you are one of the fellows that is very active in the writing scene, but at the same time you also embark on these little journeys of yours. So you truly try to get the best of both worlds, both from the academia and both from the traveling perspective. But two trips of yours that I would like to touch upon is the trip to Transcarpathia and to Transylvania. Before you went to either of those places, what were your expectations to see or encounter?
Okay. Well, those two are two very different places as well. I lived very close to Transcarpathia or Subcarpathia. I think Subcarpathia is the term that Hungarians tend to use, like at the base of the Carpathians, Carpathian in Hungarian,
Correct.
and Zakarpattia in Ukrainian, like past the Carpathians. So Subcarpathia is a region that I was somewhat familiar with from living so close to it. I was 12 miles away from the Ukrainian border during the last 2 years when I was teaching in Kisvárda. And so I knew people from there. I had heard a lot of stories from there, but I really wanted to go and experience what it was like. And perhaps of all the Hungarian regions outside of the borders, it's maybe the most different, the most unique, especially today. Transylvania, I think I saw in more depth than I ever had before this past week with the trip with the fellows. But I had visited a number of times before to Arad, to Nagyvárad. Last year I went to Csíkszereda and Csíksomlyó for the Pentecost celebration. So I was somewhat familiar with those before.
And when you were on those places, did they feel like it was Hungary to you? The architecture, the city layout? I want to touch upon the people as well, but now I'm really into architecture, so I want to see your remarks, or hear your remarks on that.
Yeah, in my travels around the Carpathian Basin, and I think I've seen kind of the four main regions, Felvidék in Slovakia, Carpathian in Ukraine, Erdély in Romania, and Vajdaság in Serbia. And in each of those places, the cities have very much struck me as being Hungarian in their look. Maybe one observation I have about Hungarian cities is they tend to be built around kind of a main road, whereas in Poland, I noticed more it was like a main square. It wasn't there. I mean, it was just for walking. There were no cars. Whereas in Hungary, it seemed like the city center was more kind of that main road. Like in Debrecen, for example, the whole city is kind of built along that one main line with the tram route. And there is kind of a square in the middle of it with the Reformed Church. So that's maybe what I've noticed in cities like Kassa and others throughout the Carpathian Basin as well. So architecture and the architecture as well strikes me as being Hungarian. It was fun in Transylvania to see the Art Nouveau, the Hungarian secessionist architecture, which is it's a very very pretty style and tries to draw on more traditional Hungarian architecture elements. So it's really unique. I traveled to Nagyvárad with my family last summer, And I think they had low expectations maybe for Romania, and they were very impressed with Nagyvárad. It's a very, very pretty city.
When you were going to either of these two destinations, your ability to speak in Hungarian, what do you think, what opportunities did it open up for you in comparison with the other fellows?
Well, it was interesting with Subcarpathia. Some Hungarians, I had heard a lot about it's a difficult situation now, perhaps for the Hungarians with language laws and things of that nature. And some Hungarians had told me maybe you shouldn't start by speaking Hungarian with people there, because some people might not look on it well. But I was pleasantly surprised there. Often I started speaking English to people there, and they would respond in Ukrainian, and we couldn't communicate. And then I said, "Magyarul beszél," and then everything went fine from there. In Transylvania, I guess I've said it before. I'll say it again, that the Hungarian, like a little bit of the Hungarian language, goes a long way, because I think Hungarians know how difficult Hungarian is, how different it is, what a small country it is, and I think they really appreciate when people make an effort to learn Hungarian. So I noticed that as well in Transylvania. A couple of summers ago, I had a cool experience where I went to Mass in the city center in Nagyvárad, and afterwards the priest just kind of came up and introduced himself, and we ended up talking in Hungarian, and then he was very surprised that I was from America, and we got lunch. So those are the kind of opportunities that you can experience with a little bit of the language.
Of course, both places have their unique history and stories. Did you have any personal interaction with one person, or did you experience something that really struck you about the respective place? So, for example, in Transcarpathia, you talk to a mayor, a person on the street, and their story is something that you will carry with yourself. Did you have any of these experiences?
Yeah. Maybe one interaction in particular was with the tour guide in Budapest, in Budapest, who told me a lot about the history of the town, which goes back centuries, and it's always been a place of a mixture of different ethnicities, of Hungarians, of Roma, of Jews, of Ukrainians, Ruthenians. And I suppose one thing that struck me just in this unique situation in Ukraine at the moment and in Subcarpathia, obviously is the impact of the war. And I was really struck by how normal life seemed in Berehove, in Beregszás, during the time of war. On the surface, people eating pizza with friends on the streets at a cafe, or kids playing at the playground at school, and everything just kind of felt normal. But in my conversation with this tour guide, it became clear that things really are not normal, but below the surface right now, where families have been separated because of the mandatory military draft, or there are even men living in hiding from the military draft. And I'd assumed my guide was from the Hungarian side, and so was able to travel over easily. But no, he told me he's from Subcarpathia, and just kind of lives with that uncertainty of the draft and the war. So that I think that was a striking experience or encounter in Subcarpathia. In Transylvania, maybe what struck me the most is just the beauty of the landscape. I think for all of us, our favorite spot was Torocko, which is a small village with very traditional, old, charming Hungarian houses it's tucked in this beautiful mountain valley, beautiful valley with tall mountains on all sides. And in my experience of Hungary was of a very flat country. People ask me how Kisvárda compared to back home in Minnesota, and I would tell them it's very similar, like flat and cornfields and rivers and lakes. And so I've always kind of thought of the Hungarians as being people who inhabit flat lands, kind of like my people back in Minnesota. So it was interesting to see Hungarians living in a very different landscape, living in the mountains, living in a place where it gets very cold in the winter, and there's snow on the mountain peaks and snow in the winter, things like that. So that for me was a fun experience to really see the beauty of central Transylvania and Székelyföld.
And what do you think out of these two destinations? What did these places teach you? Of course, you saw these places from, well, we can put it bluntly, you as an American visitor, you went to these places. Of course, you are now much more familiar with Hungarian history and culture, so you are obviously aware of the cultural and historical importance of these two places. You know Trianon, you know the current geopolitical situations. But if someone asked you what is one thing that you carry with you based on the experiences of these two trips, so to speak, what would you say to them?
I think one big takeaway is the fierce independence of the Hungarians and their attachment to their land and their identity in a way that I think can be difficult sometimes for Americans to understand. I think one telling illustration of this is the fact that Americans often use the word nation to mean the same thing as country, whereas a Hungarian would speak of the Hungarian nation as existing even beyond the borders of Hungary in former territories of Hungary. So that's the Hungarian people, the Hungarian nationality exists beyond the modern borders of Hungary. And of course, many Americans have no idea that there are Hungarians in the neighboring countries. I think we might assume, just looking at the map, that, okay, Poland, here are the borders of Poland, this is where Polish people live. Here are the borders of Slovakia, that's where Slovaks live. Here's Hungary, that's where the Hungarians live. I think that's maybe the assumption. I remember in high school looking at like a world history textbook, and there was a map of the religions of the world. And I remember seeing this little dot in Romania. It was all Orthodox, and there was like a little dot that was like Catholic, or maybe it was even mixed Catholic Protestant, something like that. Like, what in the world is that? And I think that's when I first learned about the Hungarians living outside the borders. And so, like, for example, with the language laws in Subcarpathia, I think many Americans' reaction to that might be something like, well, if you, and obviously it's a very touchy subject, but if you live in a country, shouldn't you adopt that country's language? Shouldn't you adopt that country's identity? Because that's what all of our ancestors did, essentially. When my ancestors came to the U.S. from Sweden, Luxembourg, Germany, they adopted an American identity. They adopted the language. And I think maybe the mentality is a little bit different here, where it's like, no, we're Hungarians, and that's fundamentally who we are, and we want to keep that identity, and this land has been where our ancestors lived for centuries. And so I think that's something that I experienced in both Subcarpathia and in Transylvania, is even over 100 years after the Treaty of Trianon, after these territories were separated from Hungary, the Hungarian identity is just as strong, and the Hungarian language is still spoken in the majority in a lot of places.
Main lessons from these trips is truly not just that you get more and more intimate with this region, let's call it the Carpathian Basin. But we also learn through your perspectives of first realizing the meaning behind a statue, a mountain, and everything that can have relevance to Hungarian culture. And for my part, I mean, I learn a lot about these trips because I consider these cities and their environments natural places to go to. I mean, I'm Hungarian, I go to Hungarian city, I go there to drink or eat, I just experience it in the general.
Yeah, that is really interesting. And that's maybe something that's hard for most Americans to understand too, is, when I travel to a place like Marosvásárhely in Transylvania, I think of it as traveling to a Hungarian city. People are speaking Hungarian, the history is Hungarian, the architecture is Hungarian, but it's within today's Romanian borders. Right? So, that's maybe something that a lot of Americans don't grasp.
But I think with every podcast that we do, with every article we publish, our sole purpose is raising awareness for a region that is not always at the forefront of the web pages, or just not the front page story, but now we are getting more and more in the spotlight for various reasons. But I think these conversations bring us closer to understanding the region and also getting a better view of Hungary and what's happening here. So thank you very much for this discussion, Luke. I truly enjoyed it.
Absolutely. Oh, you're welcome, Betsa. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone, for listening to us.
Thank you for listening to this MCC podcast episode. For further media content, please look up our English website at mcc.hu/en or look for us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. If you want to read more by our professors, external contributors, and students, check out our knowledge base at corvinus.hu/en.